coming in so loud.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Emanuel Salinas Avila, and this is my presentation about the Berlin Wall for the exercise 13 of contemporary world. Well, first of all, the Berlin Wall. What is the Berlin Wall, and when and why it was erected? Well, actually, when the Second World War finished, Germany was divided, and also Berlin was occupied by the winner countries, which were United States, France, England, and the Soviet Union. But actually, the relation between the communists of the Soviet Union and the other countries were not so good. So two different ideologies emerged, and finally two Germanys were created. Then in 1949, the part occupied by USA, France, and England became the new German Federal Republic, and the part occupied by the Soviet Union became the Germany Democratic Republic. So now the city was divided. Actually, the weak Soviet economy plus the advancing economy of the occidental part of Berlin caused that many people leave the oriental part to live in the German Federal Republic and to become part of the capitalist model and have a better life. In 1961, the Soviet Union realized this, and on August 13 of that year, the Soviet authorities began to build a provisional wall, and they closed 69 of the 81 points of crossing between the two Germanys. Also, wire fence were put, and the transport services were interrupted. And this stopped all these actions to stop the exodus of people to the occidental part. In the next days, the government continued with the construction of the wall, so it became really really long, and so many people tried to cross to the other side, but many of them lose their lives. They were killed or dead. All this happened in the period of the Cold War. Actually, the Cold War was a period from the end of 40s to approximately 1990, in which there was a political confrontation between the two superpowers of that time after the World War II. We are talking about the United States and the United Soviet Socialist Republic. It is called cold because it never was an open and direct military conflict between the two countries. Actually, the war was fear about nuclear weapons. But the point is that both countries played to know which nation was the strongest, the nation with more influence and more power. The Cold War was an era of constant tension. The interests of both nations and their opposite economic systems led to a big conflict of violence and instability. Actually, here the Berlin Wall symbolizes during the Cold War the confrontation and division among the two blocs that dominated the world at that time in the 20th century. We need to talk about some of the governors and authorities that the Soviet Union had, and this is really important to know why the Soviet Union fell down. So we are going to talk about Leonid Brezhnev. Actually, he was the General Secretary of the Communist Party since 1964 until he died. The period in which he was in the power was characterized by an economic standstill, a paralyzed politics, and an affirmation of the Soviet Union exterior power. Actually, he created the Brezhnev Doctrine, claiming that the communist states could intervene in the internal issues of other countries if their political system, socialism, seemed threatened. Actually, Leonid wanted to guarantee a political stability, mainly to protect the power and privilege of the Communist Party members. Actually, I think this was a big error of him, because he tended to leave the party members in their position until they decided to retire or until they died. So the Soviet Union was directed by old people. In addition, there were a lot of corruption among the government, because the privilege were the most important thing in the authorities' minds. So the state became bogged down, and the people were put aside. The privilege and the power for the authorities were the most important thing here, and that's terrible. Then we have Yuri Andropov. Actually, we can think it's easy to think that an old and sick man like Leonid Brezhnev, that had health problems, was substituted by a young and a man with energy, but that was not what happened. Actually, Leonid was substituted by other old and worse sick men in the power called Yuri Andropov, who only ruled 15 months, and 5 of those months he was on the hospital. So this was terrible because of his health problems. An important characteristic of his government was his austerity, but also he proposed the decentralization and a new economic system. But unfortunately, a big error that led to a crisis on the country was that he adopted a hard politic of repression against any type of political disagreement. So because he only ruled 15 months, actually also he didn't have time to do so much things. He proposed new reforms and he tried to do new things, but because of his health conditions, he didn't have time to do so much things, and he later died. But then we have Konstantin Cherenkov. He was in front of the Soviet Union, substituting Yuri Andropov. He actually was 13 months in the power, and then he died. He was 72 years old when he assumed the power. A man called Yevgeny Chasov, who is an academic man, said that Konstantin tried to make his work and led the nations with honestly, but actually he didn't have the enough abilities, talent, and knowledge to develop correct his work. So the principal thing here we can say is that at the moment in which Konstantin assumed the power, he was seriously sick. He tried to establish good relationships with China and Spain, but with USA the thing didn't went really good, because there was a boycott to the Olympic Games in USA in 1984. Finally, Konstantin died, and he was substituted by a man with new ideas called Mikhail Gorbachev. So these leaders of the Soviet Union had errors that led to a crisis to the nation, and then this man called Mikhail Gorbachev emerged with new ideas. We are going to talk about this. Actually, Mikhail Gorbachev began to rule on the Soviet Union in 1985. When Mikhail assumed the power, he began to propose new reforms to reorder the government. He had clear that the economy was in terrible situation and a restructuration was needed. He proposed mainly 2 reforms, which were really popular at that time. The number 1 is the perestroika, and the 2 glasnost. The number 1, the perestroika, in Spanish reestructuración, consisted in reform the economic structures of the Soviet system. This reform wanted to give possibilities to businessmen without attack the socialist system. The perestroika was implemented in 1987, trying to save the Soviet Union from a terrible economic situation. On the other hand, the glasnost, in Spanish apertura, consisted in give more freedom to the journalists and communication mediums. There was more expression among the people about the ideas that they had. Mikhail wanted to rescue the socialism to give a new and a socialist structure to the country. That's because he proposed these reforms. But then he didn't work because in part these reforms led to the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So the objective didn't work at all because of the disintegration some years later. And with all these important things that happened at that time, we need actually to talk about the domino effect that began in Poland. There was like a domino effect of revolutions and fall of communist regimes that began in Poland and continued in the Soviet Union, Hungary, Bulgaria, in the German Democratic Republic, etc. All began with the politics of Mikhail Gorbachev. His reforms, the perestroika and the glasnost, had a big impact in the fall of the Soviet system. This was not the objective of the reforms, but that was the result. He didn't do anything to defend the communist regimes from the East European countries. Poland began with the revolutions. There were strikes of the Solidarity Union against the communist government. These strikes resulted then in a transition to a democratic system. In Hungary, the own communist reformer threw the system down. Here there was established a multi-party, and the Hungary Working Social Party fell down in 1989. Then in that same year, with the manifestation context and the social pressure, the Berlin Wall fell down, with the German Democratic Republic. Also, there were more manifestations like this in Czechoslovakia and Romania. Talking about the fall of the Berlin Wall, after 28 years of separation, the reforms impulsed by Mikhail Gorbachev, plus the manifestations and the open of frontiers between Hungary and Austria, led to the open of the frontiers of the German Democratic Republic. In addition, the Soviet Union actually was passing through a bad situation, and the citizens of the oriental part were sick of this issue. Finally, in front of all that popular pressure, on November 9 in the year of 1989, the government determined that the pass to the occidental part was allowed. That day, miles of people arrived to the passing points to cross to the other side and see again their families and friends. And that's how the Berlin Wall reached its end, and the people began to destroy the wall. But what about the social consequences of the fall of the socialist bloc? The people were happier or discontent? Well, in general, the consequences were very important in an international point of view. For one side, the people were happy because some socialist countries wanted their independence. In addition, when the Berlin Wall fell, a lot of people could see again their family and friends. They could pass to the other side and see again their loved ones. They were sick of the repression of the socialist bloc. They wanted to be free and to pass to the other side to live in better conditions. But actually, the consequences in general for the popular classes of the URSS were totally terrible. Their life level fell down in an incredible way. They lose their social protection, the inequality become more evident, and their democracies that were established were not actually real. For this side, the people was discontent. From my point of view, I want to say my personal conclusion. Answering the question if the economic system or the decisions taken by the socialist leaders, what of this failed? Well, in my opinion, all contributed to the fail, but I think that mainly the decisions taken by the social leaders, because, for example, there were a lot of corruption and dishonesty in the government of Leonid Brezhnev. Actually, the authorities at that time were old and sick people. I mean, it's it's not quite good to lead a nation in these conditions. I think that if the authorities gave more importance to the well-being of the people than to the privilege and power, the economy will grow up and the people will be happy independent of the type of economic system. If the people could have more rights and better life independent of the economic system, all will be good. So this actually didn't happen at that time, and this led to the disintegration of the Soviet Union. This is an important topic, and this is all for today. I hope you enjoyed the trip and the tour around the Berlin Wall. I hope you enjoy it, and see you next time.
Coming in so loud.